Good news, good news. King Qi surrendered without fighting. The 6 kingdoms were destroyed, and the 4 seas were won. The messenger rode a fast horse and shouted as he passed through half of Xianyang. Li Shui sat in the Dan room, wanting to cry without tears. Qin Shi Huang has unified China, not far from burning books and burying Confucianism. Keywords of the novel. I was a godly stick in the Qin Dynasty without a pop-up window. I was a godly stick in the Qin Dynasty. Download the complete text and read the latest chapter on my godly stick in the Qin Dynasty. Chapter 1. Alchemy Pills for the King of Qin. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Alchemy Pills for the King of Qin. Good news, good news. King Qi surrendered without fighting. The 6 kingdoms were destroyed, and the 4 seas were won. The messenger rode a fast horse and shouted as he passed through half of Xianyang. It wasn't until the entrance of Lanqi Palace that I jumped off my horse, lowered my voice, and dared not make any more noise. However, the news of Qin's unification quickly spread throughout the palace. Lanqi Palace, Yingzhan Hall, there is a small alchemy room in the corner. Li Shui sat inside the alchemy room, stirring the fire and sighing, Qin Shi Huang has unified China. It's not far from burning books and burying Confucianism. Until now, he couldn't believe that he had traveled to the Qin Dynasty and was reborn on a scholar named Weiguzi. This Weiguzi is not very old, but he is very brave. He was recommended by someone and came to the palace to refine pills for Qin Shi Huang. But his level is not good, he is a double-edged sword. He has repeatedly failed in alchemy and is simply the laughing stock among alchemists. I heard that these things have already spread to Yingzheng's ears. The king of Qin was secretly angry and began to suspect whether he was a fraud. Weiguzi died suddenly in fear in the Danfang. Then Li Shui crossed over and became the takeover hero. Just as Li Shui thought of this, he smelled a sticky smell. A furnace of elixirs has been melted down again. There's no way, wash the furnace and refine it again. If we don't achieve the goal today, we might really have our heads on the ground. Li Shui scratched his head hard and warned himself, focus, be sure to focus. Li Shui washed the alchemy stove clean and started to light a new fire to dry. This step doesn't have much technical content, but it can be done by fishing. So he began to be restless again and said, actually, alchemy is not difficult. As long as the pill is formed, it won't kill anyone. Anyway, the elixir of immortality cannot be verified for its effectiveness. As long as the king of Qin doesn't die, no one knows if he will be immortal. The key is that I can avoid the first day of junior high school and the 15th day. Even if I refine it into a pill, I will burn books and bury scholars in the future, and all the alchemists in Xianyang will be killed. Can I still live? According to historical records, 2 alchemists secretly slandered Emperor Qin Shi Huang. After being arrested, they bit each other and confessed hundreds of their accomplices. So, if you want to survive, there are only 2 options. Firstly, immediately flee Xianyang. Secondly, forming enemies with those alchemists made everyone aware that they were incompatible and could not be accomplices. The first method may sound simple, but the palace is not a place to come and go whenever you want. Moreover, Qin's laws are strict, and those who are wanted cannot move a single step. As for the second method, it's a bit difficult to handle. We can't make trouble or offend people without reason, can we? Li Shui sighed and said, anyway, let's refine the pill first. Let's talk about it after passing the current level. So he opened the bamboo slips left by Weiguzi, selected a prescription, and began placing medicinal stones inside. This time, the fire should be smaller as long as it doesn't burn. Even if it doesn't turn into a pill in the end, even if I rub it with my hands, I will still make it into a pill for him. The first medicine is mercury. Li Shui ignored it directly. This thing is poisonous and really killed Yingzheng. He will have to be cut to death. The second medicine is lead. This cannot be eaten either. Heavy metals exceed the limit, and eating too much can cause mental disorders. The third medicine is saltpeter. Well, let's have a little more of this. The rest are herbs, such as ginseng, lingzhi, and Polygonum multiflorum, which should be non-toxic. Li Shui poured all his brains into it. The last medicine is sulfur. Can this be eaten? What wine did Bai Suzhen drink during the Dragon Boat Festival? Sulfur or realgar? Li Shui hesitated a bit, but with a shake of his hand, he still put some in. This elixir has been tampered with by him to the point of being unrecognizable. But anyway, any elixir is a deceitful thing. Even with proper alchemy, Qin Shi Huang could not live forever. Perhaps due to his own tampering, he can still live a few more years. Li Shui sat back on the cattail and began to fan the fire. After stirring for a while, Li Shui suddenly felt a little uneasy in his heart. Sulfur and saltpeter. Why is it so familiar? By the way, the formula for black gunpowder, isn't it? Li Shui was startled, then patted his chest again, thinking with fear. Fortunately, I didn't add charcoal, otherwise I would have to explode. Wait, those ginseng, Ganoderma lucidum, Polygonum multiflorum, mostly plants, will not form charcoal under insufficient combustion. Li Shui shuddered and got up before running outside. As soon as I ran to the door, I heard a loud noise behind me. Immediately after, the furnace split in half, the doors and windows shook to the ground, smoke and dust filled the air, making it difficult for people to breathe. That's it, it's settled now. If it's burnt, you can secretly wash it clean, but if it explodes, you can't hide it. Li Shui stumbled out of the Dan room, feeling a bit helpless. Brother Huai is truly a divine being. It is unprecedented for him to make such a big noise during alchemy. Look at the smoke and dust. Did he burn down the alchemy room? Suddenly, a burst of cheap laughter came from nearby. Li Shui looked up and saw that he knew the other person, named Lu Lai, who was also an alchemist. The Yingzhen Palace is actually like a large mansion, with many small courtyards inside. The alchemists lived in it, seeking the elixir of immortality for the emperor. Lu Lai lived next door and rushed over as soon as he heard the sound. Li Shui quickly remembered that this was not the first time this guy had come to mock people. Waiguzi ultimately died in fear and was closely related to Lu Lai's sarcastic remarks on the side. Colleagues are enemies, especially Waiguzi, who has poor skills and is occasionally stepped on by Lu Lai. Li Shui looked at Lu Lai, who was being slutty, and felt that his mouth would cause trouble sooner or later. Perhaps this guy would be among those who slander Emperor Qin Shi Huang in the future. Just now there was an explosion, and there was a lot of noise. Many people rushed to hear the wind. First were the nearby alchemists, then the patrolling guards, and then the eunuchs beside Yingzheng. If someone helps cover it up, maybe they can fool it. Unfortunately, everyone came with a gloating attitude. Especially Lu Lai, who has been adding fuel and vinegar, has been telling people how clumsy Waiguzi is, refining a furnace of pills in a mess, and in the end, thick smoke billows, doors and windows fall off, almost demolishing the house. It's just a joke. Finally, he determined that Waiguzi must be a fraud. Li Shui's heart was filled with anger upon hearing this. Accusing an alchemist in the palace of being a fraud is killing me. After listening for a while, the eunuch hurriedly left, probably reporting to Yingzheng. Li Shui took a breath, but gradually calmed down. He suddenly realized that Lu Lai had said so much, but he had been vague about why the alchemy furnace exploded. Did he say that he had never seen an explosion in the alchemy furnace? Yes, according to historical records, gunpowder was first accidentally produced by alchemists. And its appearance was probably from the Warring States period to the Qin and Han dynasties. Can we say that this explosion is the first time in the world? Suddenly, Li Shui had a way to survive in death, so he grinned and strode towards Lu Lai. Lu Lai saw Li Shui's malicious expression on his face and was a bit scared. He shouted, "Waiguzi, what are you doing?" Li Shui walked up to Lu Lai and whispered, "I'm going to die, pull a cushion." Lu Lai was so scared that he shuddered. Just as he was about to run away, Li Shui punched him on the chin. Li Shui fought while shouting loudly, "Do you dare to destroy my elixir? I am not compatible with you." Lu Lai lay on the ground, feeling extremely frustrated and said, "When did I destroy your elixir? Isn't this a scoundrel?" Li Shui raised his head again and shouted at the alchemists around him, "You have destroyed my elixir. I and the alchemists are not compatible." The alchemists watching nearby were a bit puzzled. What do we have to do with us? Why do we have to be at odds with each other? This Huaiguzi also holds grudges too much, isn't it just you mocking us? Li Shui was fighting vigorously, and just now the young eunuch had hurriedly arrived with the guards. The eunuch exclaimed loudly, "Tie them up, the king will personally interrogate them." End of this chapter. Chapter 2. I once met a fairy in my dream. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. I once met a fairy in my dream. The guards quickly tied Li Shui up. As a result, Li Shui kept shouting, "Lu Lai destroyed my elixir. Why didn't he tie him up?" Lu Lai's face turned white. But the eunuch doesn't care who is right and who is wrong. Directly said, "Tie Lu Lai up too." Li Shui shouted again, "These alchemists are all guilty. They all have a share in destroying my elixir." Those alchemists were all frightened and eloquently defended themselves. But the young eunuch didn't even listen and completely bound his mind. Whether he was guilty or not, naturally someone would make a decision. So, the alchemists were tied up in a string and marched out of the welcoming immortal hall in a grand manner. Li Shui walked at the front, with high toes and a strong aura, as if he had made great contributions. The alchemists following behind all regretted deeply. If they had known that Waiguzi was so crazy, they wouldn't have joined in the fun. Now that his alchemy has failed, there is no doubt that he will die. But when he is about to die, if he bites back and pulls a few people into the water, wouldn't it be extremely bad? The group was trembling and finally led by the eunuch to a side hall. Li Shui saw a middle-aged man standing in the courtyard. The middle-aged man was not wearing a cumbersome dragon robe or an imperial crown, but was only dressed in regular attire, but his majestic demeanor was intimidating. Li Shui immediately guessed that this person was Ying, who had just unified the world. The eunuch let out a sharp voice and said, "When you see the king, why don't you bow?" So Li Shui and the alchemists behind him knelt down one after another. Ying frowned but ignored them, just looking at a room. The door of that room was tightly closed, and there was a faint cough coming from inside. After a moment, the door opened and an old man with white beard and hair walked out. He bowed to Ying and whispered, "The young master has a sore on his back that has swollen greatly. He is red and tense, and can easily crack at any time. By this point, medication is no longer available." Ying Zheng's expression changed and he asked, "Once it collapses, what will happen?" The old man gritted his teeth and said, "Immortals are difficult to save." Ying Zheng felt a little dejected, sighed, and said, "It's okay, this heavenly mandate here, you step back." The old man bowed and left with a medicine box on his back. Li Shui knelt on the ground, his thoughts fluctuating. Ulcers and gangrene. Actually, this thing is just a big lump on the back. In later generations, it is not considered a disease at all, but in ancient times, it was simply a terminal illness. Because when ulcers and gangrene collapse, it comes with infection. If infection can be prevented, it is not difficult to treat. Li Shui had just thought of this when he heard Ying Zheng calmly say, "Who is Waiguzi?" Li Shui quickly lifted his head and said, "I am Waiguzi." Ying Zheng remained expressionless and said, "It has been 10 days since you arrived in the palace, and even a furnace of elixirs has not been refined. Many people have advised me, saying that you are a fraud. What do you have to say? Before Li Shui could speak, Lu Lai behind him loudly said, Your Majesty, this Huaiguzi is truly a fraud. Everyone knows that the immortal pill is a treasure of the immortal family, and such treasures can only be obtained from the immortal family. How can they be refined by mortals? This person's deceitful words are really hiding evil intentions. After Lu Lai spoke, the other alchemists also joined in. It is said that elixirs can only be sought from the immortal family and cannot be refined by oneself. At this moment, Li Shui finally understood why Huaiguzi was being looked down upon. Originally, the alchemists in Xianyang were all seeking medicine. This group of people is like unreliable entrepreneurs in later generations, boasting about Qin Shi Huang as an investor, attracting a large investment, and then traveling around the world, claiming to be searching for immortals. After spending all the money, come back and say that Xianyang has a vision, but the journey is long and the budget is not enough. So we brought in another investment. As a result, Huaiguzi rushed in recklessly and said there was no need to search for the immortal mountain. I could open a furnace and refine pills. Affordable and quick to take effect. This is simply smashing the rice bowls of the alchemists. Smashing people's jobs, hatred is unbearable, no wonder Lu Lai has been mocking Huaiguzi all day. Yingzheng asked Li Shui, what did you say? Li Shui calmly said, all the alchemists have been searching for the immortal mountain for decades, but in the end, they have achieved nothing. The king does not blame them. Why do they need to blame them for not completing the pill in the next 10 days? Yingzheng was slightly taken aback, feeling that there was some truth to this statement. Li Shui was full of energy and continued to say to Yingzheng, I am just a mortal body. Refining elixirs is not easy. Over the past 10 days, I have been repeatedly defeated and defeated. Today, I finally have some eyebrows. Unexpectedly, I was destroyed by Lu Lai. Lu Lai and others have been sneaking around, constantly spying, and coupled with sarcasm, they have affected my mood. They have taken a wrong step, causing the immortal energy to suddenly ignite, like a huge flood, all converging in a small alchemy furnace. How can the alchemy furnace withstand it? That's why it suddenly exploded, causing smoke and dust to fill the alchemy room. If the king doesn't believe it, it's easy to see at a glance. Li Shui sighed and said with a sorrowful expression, refining elixirs also requires opportunities. With the favorable timing, location, and people like today, I don't know when we can gather them all. Perhaps it will take another 10 years to refine the elixirs. The alchemists around almost fainted upon hearing these words. Huaiguzi, this guy is going to pit everyone to death. At a glance, did your alchemy fail? It's really unreasonable. Yingzheng looked at the young eunuch beside him, who understood and hurriedly left. 15 minutes later, the eunuch arrived with a man. The man bowed and said, Captain Ting, I am serving as the official of the Chao clan. I would like to pay my respects to the king. Yingzheng nodded slightly. Chao Jun said straightforwardly, I have already surveyed the alchemy room. I saw that the alchemy furnace was divided into 4 and 5 parts, and there were many cracks on the walls. Judging from its fracture, it was indeed not human behavior. It seems that there is a sudden expansion of qi in the alchemy furnace that cannot be released, causing it to explode. As for whether this qi is so-called immortal qi, I do not know. Upon hearing this, Lu Lai felt a chill in his heart. Did Huaiguzi really refine an elixir? It's impossible, that's impossible. He stared at Huaiguzi with crimson eyes and said, the elixir is a product of the immortal family. Why do you refine it? You are clearly lying. Li Shui shrugged nonchalantly and said, a few months ago, I met a fairy in my dream. The fairy taught me magic and ordered me to come to Xianyang to assist the king. Lu Lai is going crazy with anger. This lie is simply insulting a person's intelligence. Lu Lai has been searching for immortals for decades and has never dreamed of them. Why did Huaiguzi dream of them? Ing Zheng looked coldly at Li Shui for a moment and said indifferently, the explosion of the alchemy furnace may or may not be caused by the immortal pill. How can you prove yourself? At this moment, Li Shui suddenly realized that Ing Zheng was not as foolish as he had imagined. The lie he made up himself may not be enough to deceive him. Yes, since he is the eternal emperor, how could he be so foolish and be fooled around by the alchemists? The Qin emperor and Han Wu were just too eager for immortality, so they would rather believe in their existence than believe in their absence. With 1 in 10,000 hope, they gave support to the alchemists. Once the emperor's patience is exhausted, they will kill these scammers. But their desire for longevity led them to support another group of scammers. At this moment, Li Shui's mind was clear and he knew that he had to find a way to prove to Ing Zheng that he really had magic. Otherwise, even if he doesn't kill himself, he will have to lock himself up until the elixir is refined. Ing Zheng walked slowly to Li Shui and said with a cold face, I'm asking you a question. How do you prove yourself? Did you want me to wait for 10 years until you refine the elixir? Li Shui suddenly remembered something and a smile appeared on his face. Your Majesty, sores and gangrene are incurable diseases. If I can cure the sores and gangrene on the young master's back, can I prove that he has possessed magic? Ing Zheng suddenly changed his color and looked at Li Shui with a hopeful expression on his face. Are you serious? If you can cure the disease of sores and gangrene, I will give you a reward. Before Li Shui could answer, Ing Zheng's face darkened again and he said, if you dare to deceive me, you will be sentenced to waste chopping. Li Shui shuddered, but the cooked duck had a hard mouth and had to hold on until then. He glanced at Lu Lai and arched his hand to Ing Zheng, saying, if I cure the young master, what will Lu Lai do? Ing Zheng said, the accuser sits back. If you are innocent, Lu Lai will be executed by waist cutting. Lu Lai suddenly felt dizzy and dizzy. Li Shui smiled at Lu Lai and then said to Ing Zheng, my lord, please check the young master's condition. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Distillation Method. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Distillation Method. It's understandable that doctors want to see patients. So Ing Zheng nodded. Lu Lai saw Li Shui with a confident expression and was suddenly flustered for no reason. Can he really cure the disease of sores and gangrene? Lu Lai's mind was hot, and suddenly he let out a thud. He knelt down in front of Ing Zheng and cried, Your Majesty, the young master has a noble status. How can this scammer desecrate him? Ing Zheng's face darkened and he felt a bit displeased. Li Shui caught a glimpse of Ing Zheng's face and immediately felt at ease. He took 3 steps and 2 steps forward, slapping Lu Lai in the face with a big slap. Young master is in danger, and you are still obstructing here. Do you not want the young master to recover? Lu Lai, I am at odds with you. Lu Lai was beaten so hard that he felt dizzy and confused, covering his face. Why do you always emphasize that you are not compatible with me? Just as Lu Lai was puzzled, Li Shui had already pushed the door and walked into the room. The room is elegantly and nobly decorated, burning with a pleasant aroma. There are 2 palace maids kneeling in front of a low collapse. Li Shui walked over and saw that the person on the low platform was very small, only about 10 years old. Li Shui was a bit puzzled and said, so small. The 2 palace maids were a bit reserved when they saw a man coming, bowed and retreated to the side. Li Shui ignored the 2 palace maids and only observed the person on the low couch. He saw him lying naked with an egg-sized sore on his back. Indeed, as the doctor just said, it has risen greatly and may soon collapse. Li Shui squatted down to take a look and saw that the person on the bed was still awake. It's a boy. The boy smiled at Li Shui and then closed his eyes in pain. Li Shui asked, What's your name? The boy closed his eyes and said, Ing Fuyao. Li Shui nodded and carefully examined it, feeling that there was no problem with the sores and gangrene in the next 1 or 2 days, and they would not rupture. So Li Shuifan instructed the two palace maids to take good care of Ing Fuyao and not damage his sores. Then he walked out quickly. Ing Zheng was still waiting outside when he saw Li Shui come out, with a hint of nervousness in his eyes. However, this tense expression flashed away and turned into calmness and indifference again. Emperor, the emperor must be ruthless. The emperor, who is filled with joy and anger, is too fragile. How can he rule the world? Li Shui bowed to Ing Zheng and said, I can cure Prince Fuyao's illness. Ing Zheng suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. Li Shui said again, it's not early today, so I'm afraid it won't be too late. Tomorrow, I will come to practice immortal magic. Please send 2 or 3 people from the king to listen to my call. I need to make some preparations. Ing Zheng pointed to the eunuch beside him and said, Ji Ming, you choose 2 more people. These days, the 3 of you will be following Waiguzi's side and will not leave at all. The eunuch named Ji Ming agreed, knowing that he was monitoring Waiguzi to prevent him from running away. After giving orders, Ing Zheng left. He took care of many things every day, and even his son, the patient, could not abandon national affairs because of this. Lu Lai and those people, you look at me, I look at you, all of them have slipped away, so as not to make excuses for hitting others again by Li Shui. Li Shui sneered at Lu Lai's back and said to Ji Ming, follow me out of the palace. Ji Ming was startled and thought to himself, are we going to run away now? He nervously asked, Lord Huai, what are you going out of the palace for? Buy wine, Li Shui said as he walked. Ji Ming followed closely behind Li Shui and casually hired 2 small eunuchs as laborers along the way. One of them is called Xiaoyi, and the other is called Wu Jiao. 3 young eunuchs whispered and followed Li Shui out of the palace with complex expressions all the way. Just as he walked out of the palace gate, Li Shui met a rough-faced man head on. The man grabbed Li Shui's arm and asked, Brother Huai, I heard that there was an accident in the Danfang and I was about to enter the palace to see you. Are you okay? Li Shui was taken aback for a moment and immediately recognized that this person was General Li Xianyang. When Li Xianyang failed to conquer Chu, he was chased by Xianyang and had no choice but to meet Waiguzi, who saved his life. Later, when the state of Chu was destroyed, Waiguzi came to Xianyang, hoping to enter the palace to refine pills. Li Xianyang showed gratitude and recommended him to Ing Zheng. The 2 of them can also be considered close friends. Li Shui saw Li Xianyang's sincere expression, and his concern was definitely not false. I couldn't help but feel a little moved and patted his shoulder, saying, I'm fine. Let's go out of the palace, brotherly, don't worry. Li Xianyang nodded and said, if nothing happens, it's better. Ji Ming hesitated for a moment at the back, then leaned into Li Xianyang's ear and whispered what had just happened. After hearing this, Li Xianyang was shocked and hurried into the palace to see Ing Zheng. Li Shui didn't notice Li Xianyang, he was racking his brains to figure out the steps to make alcohol. After a moment, Li Shui walked into a tavern. As soon as the 4 of them entered, the boss warmly welcomed them and said, a few distinguished guests, what kind of wine would you like? Li Shui thought for a moment and said, we need good wine, strong wine, and wine that can intoxicate people. The boss pointed to several jars of wine in the corner and said with a beaming expression, this wine is called drunken immortal wine, and even immortals can get drunk. It has the strongest temperament. The boss, fearing that his persuasiveness might not be enough, added mysteriously, the alchemists in the palace, such as Lord Lu and Lord Ho, all like this wine and occasionally come to buy 1 or 2 jars. When Li Shui heard him mention the alchemist, he immediately became furious and vigorously patted the counter, shouting loudly, Waiguzi, I am not compatible with other alchemists. Please write down this sentence and spread it to me. Anyone who comes to buy wine from you must pass it on. The boss was startled and agreed. Li Shui pointed to the drunken immortal wine and said, first, come to the 3 altars. If you can truly intoxicate the immortals, you will receive a heavy reward. If you harm the important events in the palace, wait for everyone to be executed. The boss was so scared that his soul was about to fly. Drunken immortal, that's a metaphor. How can we take it seriously? Everyone. Are you from the palace? Ji Ming and others were too lazy to pay attention to him, so they each carried a jar of wine and walked outside. Li Shui vigorously patted the counter and said, "Pay, pay. Don't you have to pay for the wine in the palace?" Ji Ming thought to himself, do you also need to pay for wine in the palace? However, he didn't dare to defy Li Shui's intentions and struggled to pull out a string of Qin Ban Liang, throwing it on the counter. Li Shui carried his hands behind his back and walked slowly towards the Orchid Pool Palace. The more the boss thought, the more afraid he became. He quickly caught up and grabbed Li Shui, saying, Sir, I still have a few stronger jars of wine. Let's put down this drunken immortal wine. Subsequently, regardless of whether Li Shui agreed or not, the boss picked up the several jars of drunken immortal wine mixed with water and threw them in the corner. Then one person replaced it with a jar of real liquor. After returning to the Lanqi Palace, Li Shui found some clay jars and began to boil wine. According to the knowledge learned in later generations, the boiling point of water is 100 degrees, while the boiling point of alcohol is only 78 degrees. Therefore, as long as the wine is heated to between the boiling points of the two, a large amount of alcohol can be collected from the steam. This is the distillation method of later generations. Li Shui tried it and the effect was indeed good. However, the utensils were rudimentary, and the alcohol content may not be high enough, so Li Shui steamed it repeatedly 3 times. Ji Ming sat next to him for a while, feeling the aroma of the wine getting stronger and stronger, and in the end, he almost fell drunk. He looked at the transparent liquid and couldn't help but ask, Lord Huai, what is this? Li Shui smiled and said, this is the essence of wine, which is called alcohol. Meanwhile, in Yingzhang's study, Li Xianyang was earnestly speaking, Your Majesty, Waiguzi is a gentle person with a simple mind. He is not a fraud. If alchemy is not successful, perhaps there is another reason. Your Majesty must not rashly add to the offense. Yingzhang said calmly, I have already given him a chance. If he can cure Fu Yao's sores and gangrene, I will naturally spare him from death. Li Xianyang sighed and said, the disease of sores and gangrene is a terminal illness. It is extremely difficult to cure it. It must be Waiguzi who has no way out, so he is risking everything. Your Majesty, if Waiguzi can cure the young master well, please reward him. If he cannot cure him well, please spare his life. This person is very talented, and I will see him heal and save people in the Chu region with my own eyes. At that time, Xianyang was chasing after him closely, and I will be seriously injured. I am about to. Before Li Xianyang could finish speaking, a young warrior next to him interrupted his words. The person smiled and said, Chu. General Li really remembers Chu. In that battle, he lost his armor and 200,000 soldiers, and they were all buried. If it weren't for my grandfather revitalizing the power of the great Qin, General Li would have committed a great crime. Li Xianyang was furious and waved his fist, shouting, even Wang Jian wouldn't dare to speak in front of me like this. Even my father Wang Ben would be respectful when he meets me. What are you, Wang Li? How can you be so arrogant? Wang Li sneered and said, General Li, are you going to take action? I, Wang Li, am not afraid of you. Li Xianyang heard him call him Old General and was so angry that he almost fainted. I'm only 40 years old, so I'm called old. At this moment, Yingzhang coldly drank and said, that's enough. In front of me, you dare to be so reckless. Wang Li gave a dry laugh and said, Your Majesty, I'm afraid General Li has neither the ability to lead troops nor the ability to recognize people. If we lose our troops and defeat our generals, our great Qin can still regroup. If we kill Prince Fuyao, then we will regret it beyond our reach. Li Xianyang still had to speak, but Yingzhang reached out to stop him and then said to the nearby eunuch, call Ji Ming over and see how Waiguzi is preparing. After a moment, Ji Ming was full of alcohol and ran over. Zheng was furious and said coldly, I made you stare at Waiguzi. How dare you drink and indulge? Ji Ming was so scared that he knelt down on the ground and kowtowed vigorously, Servant, I dare not drink alcohol. This is Waiguzi cooking wine, and there is a smell of alcohol on my body. Zheng's anger grew even stronger. He didn't think of a way to save Fuyao, but he was cooking wine. Ji Mingzhan trembled and said, Waiguzi boiled something from the wine called alcohol. The meaning is, it means. Ji Ming tilted his head and thought for a while, then said confidently, it means a fairy in the wine. Zheng was furious and casually smashed the bamboo slip in his hand onto Ji Ming's body, saying, bold. Waiguzi and dares to play with me like this. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Surgery in the Midnight. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Surgery in the Midnight. Is there a fairy in the wine? Wang Li was almost overjoyed. Is this Waiguzi a scammer? It's completely clear. Zheng's anger did not dissipate and he shouted, someone, cut off the Huai Valley. Li Xianyang suddenly knelt down and begged, Your Majesty, if the treatment fails, it won't be too late to be executed. Anyway. Li Xianyang didn't say the rest. But that meaning is already very clear. Anyway, Fuyao is suffering from ulcers and gangrene, and he will undoubtedly die. Let Waiguzi die and become a living horse doctor. Zheng glared at Li Xianyang and once again ordered the capture of Waiguzi. Li Xianyang is a bit anxious. Waiguzi is his life-saving benefactor. How can one stand idly by when a benefactor encounters difficulties? He gritted his teeth and said, I only ask the king to give Waiguzi a chance. If the treatment fails, I will be willing to share the same sin as Waiguzi. Generally, why do you need to be like this? This scammer is so absurd, who can't see it? Just because he saved you once, you have faith in him, Wang Li said in a row. Li Xianyang could no longer suppress his anger and jumped up, punching Wang Li in the face. Wang Li suddenly had a long nosebleed. He shouted angrily and was about to raise his hand to fight back. Zheng threw all the bamboo slips on several cases over and cursed, Get out of here. So Li Xianyang left Ji Ming and the three of them ran away in a mess. However, no matter what, Zheng finally did not say anything more about killing Waiguzi, and Li Xianyang managed to secure a frontline opportunity for Li Shui. Ji Ming returned to the Dan room and saw Li Shui grinding his knife on the sharpening stone. The finger-wide razor has been polished to a shiny shine. Ji Ming was terrified when he saw Li Shui now. He asked cautiously, Lord Huai, what are you doing? Li Shui casually said, Treat the disease. Then he tried the blade with his finger and nodded in satisfaction, saying, Very good, very sharp. It seems that this time, the blade has cured the disease, and Fuyao's life is saved. Ji Ming sighed, now he felt that Waiguzi was not a fraud, but rather a bit like a madman. Well, whether it's crazy or deceitful, he won't live long anyway. There's no need to compete with a dying person, just do whatever he wants to do. After returning to his residence, Lu Lai felt more and more uneasy. If Waiguzi saves Fuyao, wouldn't he be sentenced to waist cutting? Although sores and gangrene are incurable diseases, what if? What if Waiguzi really has any magic? Lu Lai became more and more afraid as he thought, seeing that the sun had already set and he couldn't fall asleep. Just strolled around and arrived outside the courtyard of Waiguzi. The eunuch named Xiaoyi sat at the door, washing a white cloth with a painful expression on his face. Lu Lai patted Xiaoyi's shoulder, pulled him out, and then stuffed a string of Qin Ban Liang. Xiaoyi understood and said to Lu Lai, Lord Lu, what do you want to know? Lu Lai asked Xiaoyi, Waiguzi, how are you going to save Prince Fuyao? Xiaoyi said, how can I save it? I don't know. But on this day, Lord Huai was very busy. First, he caught the fairies in the wine, and then he sharpened his knife, saying he was using it to save people. Later, he ordered several servants to wash white cloth. The 3-foot-wide white cloth has been washed for more than 10 zhang. I wonder if this thing is used for hanging, right? Upon hearing this, Lu Lai breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. From my perspective, what Waiguzi has done is not like a fraud, but more like a madman. Xiao Yi felt as if he had met a confidant, both surprised and delighted. Lord Lu thinks the same. Lu Lai felt even more at ease, patted Xiao Yi's shoulder, and whispered, if he has any movement, remember to call me. Subsequently, Lu Lai went back to sleep with peace of mind. I slept soundly this night, but the only downside was that I didn't dream of a fairy. Xiao Yi and Wu Jiao took turns washing the white cloth, washing it for 20.30 zhang. After washing it clean, they were asked by Li Shui to boil it in water. Boiled for half an hour, then soaked in alcohol before letting it air dry. By midnight, the white cloth had almost dried. Li Shui lit the lamp and looked at it. After all the twists and turns, the white cloth had become somewhat like a bandage for future generations. So he disinfected his hands and satisfactorily rolled up the white cloth. After finishing the exam, Li Shui called out the 3 young eunuchs, Ji Ming. Then he ordered, take a shower. Wash yourself clean. If you are so dirty that Lord Fuyao has lost his life, the king is afraid that he will dismember you in 5 parts. Ji Ming and a few others were startled and quickly went to take a shower. Li Shui is a person who likes to support others, and they have seen it before. Therefore, they washed it very seriously until their skin turned red, just afraid of being caught by Li Shui as an excuse. After a few people had finished washing and changed into new clothes, Li Shui finally brought out a few clay jars and handed them to the eunuch, saying, this is alcohol, extremely precious. Don't spill it. All right, come with me. Ji Ming was confused and said, Lord Huai, where are we going? Li Shui said, naturally, it's about treating the disease. Ji Ming was startled and said, it's already midnight. Li Shui said helplessly, there's nothing we can do. Your earthen jar has poor sealing and the alcohol evaporates too quickly. If we wait until tomorrow, all the hard distilled alcohol will be gone. Ji Ming listened in confusion and said, what's going on? Will the spirits in this wine still escape? Xiao Yi and Wu Jiao saw Li Sailor holding a razor inside, sharpened extremely sharp. They were somewhat afraid and remembered a sentence. In the dark of the moon and the high winds of the night, when killing and setting fire when passing by Lu Lai's residence, Xiao Yi deliberately fell behind a few steps and then called out a few times outside Lu Lai's door. As for Lu Lai's inability to get up, he can't control it anymore. A group of 4 quickly arrived at Ng Fuyao's residence, and Li Shui entered the room with a knife in hand. There are 2 palace maids inside, and besides the palace maids, there is also a beautiful woman as beautiful as a flower. The woman still had tears on her face, indicating that she had just cried. The woman was startled when she saw a man break in and turned her head to avoid it. Ji Ming hurriedly explained beside him, this is the alchemist who is refining pills for the great king, Lord Waiguzi. He has come specifically to treat the illness in Gongzi City. Li Shui emphasized, don't forget that Waiguzi is incompatible with other alchemists. Then he casually said, idle people, you can go out now. The 2 palace maids looked at the beautiful woman. The woman said, I am the birth mother of Fuyao. Li Shui said again, relatives are not allowed to watch, go out quickly. Ji Ming, with a bitter face, persuaded the woman and palace maids out. Li Shui instructed the eunuch to sprinkle alcohol inside the room. Put out 2 more candles and replace them with homemade alcohol lamps. Alcohol lamps are both bright and clean, making them the most suitable for surgery. In order to create the effect of a shadowless lamp, several alcohol lamps were arranged in a circle around the low collapse. Ji Ming's eyes straightened and he said, it's a bit like witchcraft to swing around like this. Why doesn't Prince Fuyao have a shadow? Even Lord Huai's hand has no shadow. Witchcraft, this is definitely witchcraft. Only ghosts have no shadows. Ji Ming became more and more afraid as he thought, and couldn't help but tighten his hips. However, soon he realized that if he dirted the room, Waiguzi would blame him and his own life would be in danger, so he reluctantly endured it again. I'm a eunuch, and I didn't expect to be able to bear the urine back. Ji Ming was a little proud and a little sad. Li Shui took out a few pieces of white cloth and handed them to the young eunuchs, saying, "Cover your mouth and nose." Ji Ming and others were blindfolded by their words, feeling like they were like thieves. Li Shui disinfected the razor in alcohol again and casually asked Ing Fuyao, "Is that woman your mother just now?" Ing Fuyao was young and didn't have as many prefectures, but he was a bit scared when he saw Li Shui's strange behavior. So he only let out a low "hmm." Li Shui said again, "What is your mother's name?" Ing Fuyao replied, "My mother doesn't have a name. Her original surname was Yu. The palace calls her Yumeiren." Li Shui sighed and said, "The woman in the palace is really pitiful. Even if she is blessed by the emperor, she still doesn't even have a name. Just now, I saw your mother with tears on her face, and it seems she cares about you very much. When you grow up in the future, you must show filial piety to her." Ing Fuyao replied, "That's nature." Ji Ming broke out in a cold sweat as he listened. Mr. Huai is too bold. How could he inquire and discuss palace affairs so casually? Li Shui and Ing Fuyao were chatting passionately. Ing Fuyao gradually let go of his guard and his whole body relaxed. At this moment, Li Shui suddenly started cutting and made a cut on the sore. Ing Fuyao was caught off guard and felt the pain unbearable. He couldn't help but let out a scream. Yumeiren, who was originally waiting outside the door and feeling anxious, suddenly rolled her eyes and fainted upon hearing this scream. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Buying coffins should be early. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Buying coffins should be early. Not only did Yumeiren faint from fear, but the three young eunuchs inside the room also trembled. Li Shui shouted, "What are you panicking about? Come here and hold the young master down." Xiaoyi and Wu walked over trembling as they fought, holding down Ing Fuyao who was struggling. Li Shui cleared the pus and blood from the sores and said awkwardly, "Young master, I didn't prepare any anesthesia. I forgot about this. I'm really sorry." Ing Fuyao had no idea what he was saying, just kept crying. Li Shui sighed and muttered, "What's there to cry about? After cleaning up the pus and blood, disinfecting it, stopping bleeding, and wrapping it with a bandage, it will be over in 3 to 5 days. In other words, a sore is just a skin injury." As he spoke, Li Shui had already cleaned up the pus and blood, and then poured alcohol onto the wound. Ing Fuyao let out another scream of agony. Yumeiren, who had just been awakened by the palace maid, couldn't help but rush towards the door and was about to break in. Li Shui calmly instructed Ji Ming, "Block the door. If any idle people come in and kill Prince Fuyao, you will all be divided into 5 parts." Ji Mingxing reluctantly blocked the door and kept lamenting in his heart, "What evil have I done?" Yumeiren smashed the door with all her might, but Ji Ming dared not open it at all. While the scene was raging, Lu Lai arrived. Just now, Xiaoyi woke him up. At that time, he was sleeping soundly and sat on the bed for a quarter of an hour before coming back to his senses. He then hurriedly put on his clothes and rushed over. After Lu Lai arrived, he looked at the scene in confusion and curiously asked the palace maid next to him, "What's going on?" The palace maid said, "Just now, Lord Waiguzi, who is not compatible with other alchemists, came to treat his illness with a knife. He drove out Yumeiren and the maidservants. In less than a quarter of an hour, the screams of Prince Fuyao came from inside. Yumeiren couldn't rest assured and wanted to go in to have a look, but Lord Hui ordered someone to block the door. Upon hearing this, Lu Lai's eyes lit up. Guzi felt that he didn't die fast enough. His eyes rolled, and then he suggested to Yumeiren, go and report to the king. Yumeiren suddenly realized that with her own strength, she couldn't break through. For the current plan, she had to invite the king. Yumeiren didn't have time to express her gratitude and hurriedly ran towards Yingzheng's dormitory. Yingzheng has already fallen asleep, how dare the eunuch who is serving him wake him up? As a result, Yumeiren, who was extremely anxious, shouted loudly, "Your Majesty, Fu Yao will be killed by Guzi." Yingzheng suddenly woke up from his sleep, put on a piece of clothing, and walked out of the dormitory. He was both surprised and angry, and asked, why Guzi wants to plot against Fu Yao. Yumeiren knelt down on the ground and wept, saying, "Just now, I was taking care of Fu Yao when Guzi suddenly broke in and drove me out." Then she sealed the doors and windows, and within a short time, Fu Yao's screams came from inside. "My body was calling the heavens unworthy and the earth unworthy, and I could only come to see the king." Yingzheng gritted his teeth and said, "Guzi, you have so much courage." Subsequently, he strode towards Fu Yao's residence with great strides. When Yingzheng arrived, he happened to see Ji Ming open the door. The young eunuch Wu Jiao was walking out with a basin of blood. Yingzheng was furious and kicked Wu Jiao. Wu Jiao let out a scream and fell to the ground. The basin of blood spilled all over Lu Lai beside him. Lu Lai wiped the blood off his face, but his heart was filled with joy. Yingzheng still had to break inside, but Li Shui walked out and stopped him, saying, "Your Majesty, the surgery has been extremely successful. Master Fu Yao, it's not a big deal now. However, to prevent infection, please do not enter and be patient for a day or two." Yingzheng was slightly taken aback. He didn't fully understand Li Shui's words, but at least he understood that Fu Yao's life seemed to have been saved. But it is still very fragile and cannot be approached by idle people. Li Shui tilted his body slightly and pointed to Fu Yao, who was lying on the low ground, saying, "The sores and gangrene have been removed, and they will be cured within 3 days. The young master is doing very well, but the king doesn't believe it. You can personally verify it." Yingzheng saw Fu Yao lying motionless on top of it. The blood on the back has been washed clean, and there is a white cloth wrapped around it. Yingzheng shouted, "Fu Yao, how do you feel?" Fu Yao didn't answer at all. Yingzheng looked at Li Shui in confusion. Li Shui felt a bit embarrassed and explained, "The young master has been tormented by sores and gangrene for so many days, and has already been exhausted. Now that the sores and gangrene have been removed, he is relaxed and has fallen asleep." Lu Lai interjected and said, "Did you fall asleep or die? Guzi, aren't you deceiving the king?" Li Shui slapped his face directly and said, "Lu Lai, do you dare to curse the young master? What are you so worried about?" Yingzheng was originally puzzled whether Fu Yao was alive or dead, but when Li Shui said so, Yingzheng also felt that Lu Lai was a bit talkative and spoke ominously, so he gave him an unpleasant glance. After thinking for a moment, Yingzheng pointed to the young eunuch Ji Ming and asked, "How is Fu Yao?" Ji Ming whispered, "Your Majesty, the young master is indeed asleep. Unconscious. He is very cautious. If the young master dies later, it has nothing to do with him. He did not lie about the military situation." Yingzheng nodded and looked at Li Shui, "In 3 days, can Fu Yao recover?" Li Shui nodded and said, "Walking, sitting, and lying are no different from before." Yingzheng nodded and said, "Okay. I'll give you 3 more days." Then, Yingzheng turned around and left. Yumeiren cried out with a tearful tone, "Fu Yao." Li Shui said calmly, "Family members, don't disturb the patient's rest. Ji Ming, please take madam out." So Yumeiren was kicked out again. Lu Lai saw Yumeiren standing outside the courtyard, crying and wailing all along. I couldn't help but remind her, Madam, if the young master has any major or minor issues, we must not let go of Waiguzi. Yu Meiren bit her lip and nodded heavily. Li Xinfu is brightly lit. Li Xianyang is kneeling on the washboard. Madame Li had already scolded him for most of the night. For the sake of a mere Waiguzi, do you not even want your own life? He cannot cure the young master, so you will also be punished. The young master has a sore and gangrene disease, and you are going to die. Li Xianyang said with a bitter face, today, Wang Li was sarcastic towards me. In front of the king, he said that I have neither the ability to lead troops nor the wisdom to understand people. Madam, I am a general of the same generation as Wang Ben. It's not an exaggeration for Wang Li to call me uncle. How dare you insult me like this? Li Fu stomped his foot in anger and said, if someone provokes you, then you ignore everything. You don't even want to save the lives of the whole family. Li Xianyang lowered his head and said, the king greatly appreciates me. Even if I were to be punished, I should not implicate my relatives. Li Fu exclaimed in a popular voice, you are right, you are always right. Cane, take a cane. The servants and maids standing outside were both frightened and trembling. Since ancient times, men have been superior to women, but there are always exceptions. For example, General Li Xianyang was brave in battle and had a fiery personality. No one could have imagined that he feared his wife like a tiger. Mrs. Li brought a cane and wanted to hit Li Xianyang. After all, there is still some reluctance. So he slammed his cane onto the ground and cried, saying, I'll say one word, and then you'll say the other. You're obsessed with ghosts, why did you recognize this Waiguzi? Everyone knows he's a scammer, why do you believe him so deeply? Li Xianyang said with a bitter face, Brother Huai really has a unique skill. I was seriously injured that day and had no way out. Madame Li said angrily, I had no choice but to meet Waiguzi. He fed you a few pills of medicine and cured your injury, didn't he? Since you came back from attacking Chu, this has been said thousands of times. What if Waiguzi has cured your injury? He can heal, and I consider him a divine doctor, but he is not an immortal. Why do you believe that he can refine elixirs? Immortal ethereal, who has seen it again? On the day you recommended him to enter the palace to refine pills, I felt it was inappropriate. Now you are using your life and fortune to protect him from treating ulcers and gangrene. You. Mrs. Li was angry when suddenly a servant ran and shouted, Madam, Madam, there is news coming out of the palace. Mrs. Li quickly asked, How are you doing? The servant gasped for breath and said, The eunuch in the palace said that Waiguzi entered Fuyao Gongzi's room in the middle of the night with a knife and drove Yu Meiren out, saying she wanted to treat her illness. In a moment, the young master's screams came from inside. Now the young master has been tormented by him and is unconscious, in a critical situation. As long as the young master dies, Waiguzi will be sentenced to death. Upon hearing these words, Mrs. Li almost fainted. She calmed down and pointed at the butler, saying, Li Jia, you go quickly. Li Jia asked nervously, Madam, what should I do quickly? Mrs. Li took a deep breath and said, Go ahead and buy a coffin for General Li at your house. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Poisoning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Poisoning. Mrs. Li was furious and asked Li Jia to buy a coffin. Li Jia said with a bitter face, Madam, it's already late now, this. Mrs. Li stomped her feet hard and strode outside with great strides. Li Xianyang was a bit panicked and quickly asked, Madam, where are you going? Li Fu replied without looking back, I will personally pick a good coffin for you. Mrs. Li led a few people straight out of the door. There are only Li Xianyang and a few servants left at home. The air suddenly quieted down, and everyone felt a bit embarrassed. Li Xianyang coughed and said to Li Jia next to him, Why don't you help me up? Li Jia regained his senses and quickly helped Li Xianyang up. Li Xian's legs had already knelt numbly, limping towards the door, but Mrs. Li's figure had long disappeared from the street. After thinking for a while, Li Xian sighed and said, "If you buy it, then you buy it. There's always a way to die, but you'll need it sooner or later." A group of servants behind, all holding back their smiles. Mrs. Li naturally didn't really go to buy a coffin. She took a car to Qin mansion. Qin Yu is a great Confucian scholar of the time, Dr. Daqin, and a teacher of Fusu. Under the intimidating title, there is another identity, which is Li Xian's brother. In law. He just couldn't stand Li Xian's constant fighting and killing, which was extremely crude. Every time I see Li Xian, I criticize and educate him. Therefore, since the death of Li Xian's sister, Li Xian has not climbed the door of Qin Yu, and can only be considered as having lost this brother. In law. If in the past, Mrs. Li would not have provoked Qin Yu, but now that Li Xian is in danger, after careful consideration, Mrs. Li is able to say one or two words in front of Zheng. So Mrs. Li came with a hard face. The gatekeeper was quite polite and allowed Mrs. Li to enter. But after entering, I waited in the front hall until dawn. This intentional neglect has infuriated Mrs. Li, but she has to be patient and wait for someone today. After the rooster crowed 3 times, a servant finally walked over and respectfully said, "Mrs. Li, my master has invited me." Mrs. Li followed the servants to the back hall and looked up, almost infuriated. Qin Yu is dressed neatly and eating breakfast. The key is that this breakfast is for one person, obviously not prepared for Mrs. Li. Mrs. Li gritted her teeth and saluted, "I've seen my elder sister." Qin Yu remained silent. Madame Li said forcefully again, "I have seen my elder sister." Qin Yu remained silent. Mrs. Li raised her voice and shouted, "Sister-in-law." Qin Yu looked up at her with a dissatisfied expression on his face. A little maid walked over and whispered to Mrs. Li, "Confucius said, if you don't eat, don't sleep. If you have something to do, let's wait until my master has finished eating." Mrs. Li wished she could turn around and leave on the spot. But thinking about Li Xian, he endured it again. Qin Yu chewed and ate slowly for half an hour, then wiped his mouth and said calmly, "I have heard about Li Xian and Waiguzi." Madame Li bowed and said, "Please, sister-in-law, save Li Xian's life." Qin Yu stroked his beard with a look of heartbreak and said, "When Li Ji was alive in the past, I said that. As a brother, she is pure and reckless, how can she succeed? Li Ji didn't believe it and even had an argument with me. Didn't you verify my statement today?" After his defeat in the Chu state, Li Xian should reflect on his past mistakes behind closed doors to show his shame. Unfortunately, he wants to compete with Wang Ben's father and son. The argument with Wang Li is just that. Unfortunately, he didn't think it was too much trouble, so he recommended some Waiguzi. Z didn't speak strange and chaotic, and Li Xian didn't understand this truth either. Refining immortal pills, humming, it's ridiculous. It's all about recommending Waiguzi. Waiguzi has done something wrong, and Li Xian at most doesn't know anyone. He's lucky to have taken his own life as a guarantor for Waiguzi. If it's something else, just take care of it for a moment. But what he's taking care of is curing the disease of sores and gangrene. This is a terminal illness. Isn't he seeking death on his own? Mrs. Li remained silent. She finally understood why Li Xian refused to see Qin Yu. This guy is so good at being a teacher that it's outrageous. From the meeting until now, let's start with criticism and education, regardless of whether we are willing to help or not. Madame Li waited patiently for a long time, but Qin Yu finally sighed and said, "Well, Li Xian is at least Li Ji's younger brother. As my sister-in-law, how can I ignore him?" Mrs. Li finally breathed a sigh of relief and said thank you. Qin Yu waved his hand and said, "Your Majesty loves the study of legalism and the study of criminal names, and I am a legitimate Confucian scholar. Although I am a doctor of the great Qin, I do not have much power. At most, I can only save Li Xian's life. After today, Li Xian will retire from his old age and return to his hometown, safe and stable, and become a wealthy man. It's all for this life. Mrs. Li felt a bit disappointed in her heart, but on second thought, it would be great if she could save her life. So he thanked Qin Yu again. Qin Yu didn't hesitate and said calmly, "Please go back. I'm going to court, and there will be court discussions today." Mrs. Li left eagerly. Qin Yu put on his court uniform and muttered to himself, if everyone were like an old man, carrying benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trustworthiness, wouldn't there be so many bad things? The world lacks education. The sky is about to break, and the officials are gradually going to court. In Fu Yao's room. Li Shui yawned hard and had already stayed up all night. Fu Yao hasn't woken up yet, but he hasn't had a fever either. As of now, the situation is pretty good and there hasn't been any infection. According to Li Shui's estimation, by dawn, it should probably be able to recover. It's just a skin injury, not bedridden. His eyes glanced out and saw Lu Lai exploring outside the yard. That night, not only did he not sleep, but Lu Lai also did not sleep and kept sneaking around outside. Li Shui said to Ji Ming next to him, "Actually, I have a kind heart and cannot bear to kill anyone." Ji Ming grinned and could only assume that Li Shui was speaking ironically. Li Shui sighed again and said, "Although Lu Lai deserves to die, I can't bear to let him be executed for just one gambling agreement. Why don't we give him a chance?" Ji Ming drummed in his heart and said, "Give me a chance. How can I give it? Do you want Master Fu Yao to keep sleeping? This way, you don't have to die, Li Shui, and Lu Lai don't have to die either." Ji Ming felt that Li Shui could really do such a heinous and immoral thing. Through these few days of contact, he has already made it clear that Li Shui is a complete madman who cannot act in a rational manner. Ji Ming's only thought now is to leave this person and not be implicated. Just as Ji Ming's heart was in turmoil, Lu Lai, who was standing outside the yard, was also in turmoil. It has been 2 hours since Li Shui treated him. Prince Fu Yao has remained motionless. Lu Lai sighed and thought wickedly, "Fu Yao, why haven't you died yet? When he dies, I can rest assured." Over time, a terrifying thought suddenly came to his mind. "Fu Yao, what should we do if we are cured? He won't wake up in a while, will he?" These days, Lu Lai has searched through medical skills. It was discovered that there was indeed a surviving case of sores and gangrene. According to medical records, after the rupture of sores and gangrene, it is often accompanied by high fever that does not subside, unknown to everyone, and no water or rice entering. Most people lie down for 3 to 5 days and then die from a high fever without opening their eyes until death. However, there is a person in the record who has always been strong and strong. He endured it until his fever subsided. However, after waking up, the originally strong body was also tormented and emaciated, extremely weak. Of course, such an example is only recorded and whether it is true remains to be verified. No one has ever seen a real case. Therefore, it is not an exaggeration to say that the disease of sores and gangrene is a terminal illness. Thinking of this, Lu Lai comforted himself again. Impossible. Fu Yao is only 10 years old and his body is weak, so it's impossible for him to survive. He's been doing well so far. At this moment, Li Shui's pleasantly surprised shout suddenly came from inside the room. "Wake up, wake up! Master Fu Yao is awake. Go report to the king quickly." "What?" "Master said he's hungry. Go and prepare soup quickly." So Xiaoyi and Wu Jiao, 2 eunuchs, ran out. Wu Jiao headed towards Ying Zheng's dormitory, while Xiaoyi walked towards Huafang. Lu Lai stood against the wall, his body trembling like a sieve. "You're awake. You're actually awake. Not only are you awake, but you're also starving. This is clearly cured. Fu Yao woke up, I'm about to die." How cruel is the execution of waist cutting. Lu Lai touched his waist, his legs softened, and he sat down on the ground. I don't want to die, I can't die. I'm going to visit the immortal mountain and seek the elixir. I can be a fairy, but I can't die. Lu Lai's head was sweating cold, his eyes were red, and he was a bit crazy. Suddenly, Lu Lai remembered something. The red belief stone. This is something discovered while searching for immortals in the East. This substance is colorless and tasteless, but highly toxic. When ground into powder, it can quickly dissolve in soup. Coincidentally, Lu Lai has one thing. If you poison Fu Yao, it will poison him to death. So the king of Qin must be very angry and will immediately kill Waiguzi. And everyone believed that Fu Yao died from the disease of sores and gangrene, at the hands of the quack Dr. Waiguzi. No one would think of the red beacon stone. If Fu Yao doesn't die, I'll die. Lu Lai gritted his teeth and quickly walked towards the residence. After taking dozens of breaths, Lu Lai sneaked into the fire room. Xiaoyi is urging several women to cook soup, while complaining, the young master has already woken up and needs soup to drink immediately. Why not prepare it in advance? The women also complained, who knew the young master woke up so quickly. Lu Lai took advantage of people's unpreparedness and sprinkled the powder of red faith stone into the soup. Then pretended to come to the fire room to find something to eat, casually took 2 pieces of meat and left. After leaving, Lu Lai hid in a corner, staring fixedly at the burning room. After a moment, Xiaoyi came out carrying a clay jar. Not bad, it's the same jar that I drugged myself with. Xiaoyi hurriedly walked into Fu Yao's courtyard, carrying a clay jar. Lu Lai dared not show his face, but stood outside the courtyard, his ears tightly pressed against the wall, listening to the commotion inside. Oh my God, I'm dead, I'm really dead. Suddenly, Ji Ming's screams came from inside. Lu Lai's eyes lit up and a proud smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then came Li Shui's voice. Soup is poisonous in food. Then came Xiao Yi's panicked voice. It's not me, it's not me. Give me 10 courage, I dare not poison you. Li Shui asked, has anyone ever touched soup food? Xiaoyi panicked and said, I've touched it. The 2 chefs in the fire room have touched it. By the way, Lord Lu just went in to find something to eat. Lu Lai sneered and said, Waiguzi, you're about to die. Do you still have the heart to solve the case? After a while, the king came with joy, only to see his beloved son die. In a fit of anger, how could you argue? When Lu Lai thought of this, he was a bit puzzled and said, it's been a while since Wu handed it over. It's time to invite the king, isn't it? He turned around and was startled when Wu Jiao stood behind him. Wu Jiao smiled at him and said, I haven't gone to find the great king, and Lord Fuyao hasn't woken up either. It was Lord Huai who ordered me to do this. Later, Wu Jiao grabbed Lu Lai's clothes and pushed him into the yard. Upon closer inspection, Lu Lai's heart sank. Li Shui and Ji Ming stood in the yard. At their feet, the earthen jar was thrown onto the ground, and next to it, there was a dead rabbit. Li Shui looked at Lu Lai and said with emotion, Brother Lu, this rabbit has no grudges or grievances against you. Why did you poison it? You are so cruel. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Taking the wrong medication. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Taking the wrong medication, it's over, I've been tricked. This was the only thought in Lu Lai's mind. His body shook and he fell to the ground, then began to vomit due to intense fear. Li Shui walked over with a sigh, looking pitiful and compassionate. Brother Lu, if you hadn't chosen to poison me just now, but had chosen to beg for mercy from me, I would have pleaded with the king. The bet is that it's because of me. If I help you plead, you should be able to survive. Lu Lai's face turned pale and he remained silent. Li Shui said again, even if you don't beg for mercy, even if you huddle in your own room, looking fearful and waiting to be killed. Perhaps I will plead for you for a moment when my heart softens. Unfortunately, you have chosen to poison me. Not only do you want to harm me, but you also want to harm the innocent Prince Fuyao. Alas, young master, he is innocent and lovely. This way, you can even take action. It shows how bad you are. Although Waiguzi is kind, at this moment, we can only harden our hearts and slay demons. Ji Ming listened for a moment and thought to himself, why could Lord Huai speak such shameless nonsense in such a grand manner? After thinking for a moment, Li Shui turned to Xiao Yi and said, Xiao Yi, you made a big mistake by accepting bribes from Lu Lai and delivering messages on his behalf. As you were unaware of this poisoning incident, I'll spare you one more time. Now I'll give you a chance to redeem yourself, and you'll be the one to bind Lu Lai. Xiao Yi shed tears of gratitude and firmly kowtowed to Li Shui, then tied Lu Lai up in all sorts of ways. When binding Lu Lai, Xiao Yi punched him with old fists to show that he was incompatible with him. After being tied up, Li Shui, Ji Ming, and Wu Jiao escorted Lu Lai to meet Ying Zheng. Firstly, to expose Lu Lai, and secondly, to seek credit for the three of them. And Xiao Yi stayed here with Fuyao, waiting for him to wake up. On the way, Li Shui suddenly thought of something and said to Ji Ming and others, after a while, the king asked and said that the young master had just woken up. Lu Lai poisoned the young master in order to save his life. After Lu Lai was caught by us, the young master fell asleep again. It must not be said that the young master has been unconscious. It was us who deceived Lu Lai and let a snake out of the hole. Ji Ming asked in confusion, why? Li Shui explained, if Lu Lai is caught, it's because I set up a bureau to frame him. Isn't it like I'm being cunning? Ji Ming. Lu Lai remained silent, he had lost all hope and was too lazy to care about what Li Shui said. Now Master Fuyao doesn't know if he's alive or dead, but he's definitely dead. Shortly after Li Shui and others left, Fuyao, who was lying on the low ground, slowly opened his eyes and whispered, I'm thirsty. However, Xiao Yi didn't even notice. He sat on the threshold, looking towards the direction of the political hall, his mind full of fear, afraid that Lu Lai would pull a cushion and say he had received his money before he died. If that's really the case, how will I die? The political consultative hall, with Ying Zheng and various civil and military officials, is holding a court meeting. Ying Zheng sat at the top, looking at the literary and military officials below, with a plethora of talents. Thinking that the world has already been established and everyone must follow their own name, I cannot help but feel proud. So Ying Zheng said, I, with my humble body, have mobilized troops to suppress the rebellion. I have relied on the spirit of the ancestral temple, and the 6 kings have subdued their grievances. The world is at peace. The current name is not changed, and it cannot be called success. It will be passed down to future generations. I will discuss the emperor's name. Ladies and gentlemen, look at me, I look at you. The discussion began. Some people believe that during the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, kings were used as titles. Inheriting from heaven and governing all the people below, there is no need to make any changes. It's great to be called King Qin. Some people believe that in ancient times, the 3 emperors were emperor, emperor of the earth, and emperor of Thailand. We should choose the most esteemed emperor of Thailand. Some people believe that the names of the ancient 5 emperors were also extremely prestigious. It's better to call it Emperor Qin. These people were arguing, fiercely opposing each other, but never came to a conclusion. Ying Zheng was a bit tired from listening, but he also knew. Changing the imperial title is a great event that will last for thousands of years. We cannot be careless or anxious. It's not necessary to have results today. So he said indifferently, let's discuss this matter later. After the ministers return, they should think carefully and come back tomorrow to discuss it. Then he stood up. The meaning is very obvious, the court meeting has ended. However, Qin Yu suddenly said, Your Majesty, I have something to report to you. Ingzheng sat back and asked, What's up? Qin Yu said, I have heard that there is an alchemist named Waiguzi in the palace. He is known for his deceit and deceit. He first claims to be able to refine elixirs, and then claims to be able to cure ulcers and gangrene. How can we believe such nonsense? It is a great fallacy for the great king to leave this person in the palace. Allowing this person to act recklessly in the palace is even more deceitful. How can a ruler of a grand country be deceived by a vertical ruler? How does the people of the world view the great king? What is the dignity of the great Qin? The surrounding ministers nodded one after another. Waiguzi, they have also heard of him. Isn't it a joke to rely on the power of mortals to refine immortal pills? The king is really in a hurry to seek medical treatment and is confused about his desire for longevity. Qin Yu felt the attitude of everyone and became even more energetic. He loudly said, the old minister proposed to immediately kill Waiguzi, in order to declare to the world that the king is wise and powerful. He used this to warn Xiao Xiao that the king's eyes are burning with fire, how could he easily fall for it? In addition, General Li Xianyang, who knew no one, recommended such a demon to the king. This was a great mistake and he would be punished. The old minister proposed to dismiss Li Xianyang from his official position and have him retire to his hometown. Li Xianyang almost cursed beside him, Qin Yu, you are my sister. Lol. You are so good, why did you harm me? Wang Li was also a bit puzzled. Is this Qin Yu getting older and confused? Or is it that the distinction between public and private has reached this point? At this moment, Wang Ben suddenly stood up and loudly said, Is Waiguzi carrying any miraculous skills? General Li Xianyang is not sure if he knows people. Everything is still uncertain. How can we hastily execute this person? After speaking, Wang Ben gave a signal to Wang Li. Wang Li looked at his father puzzled and said, What's going on today? Did you take the wrong medicine? Wang Ben shook his head and thought to himself, You must not conspire with me, you are really a fool. Qin Yu is clearly using retreat as a means of progress, helping Li Xianyang. Yesterday, Li Xianyang had already said in front of the king that if Waiguzi failed, he would be willing to be punished together. However, Waiguzi couldn't just have to suffer from ulcers and gangrene. Li Xianyang was simply doomed. But now Qin Yu advocated killing Waiguzi before the outcome came out, and dismissed Li Xianyang on the charge of improper recommendation. This saved Li Xianyang's life. With this in mind, Wang Ben took a deep breath and continued to speak loudly, the king has an agreement with Waiguzi. He will receive a great reward for treating his sores and gangrene, but if he cannot cure it, he will be beheaded. Now that the life and death of Prince Fuyao are unknown, the king cannot kill anyone. If he were to kill him, he would be untrustworthy to the people of the world. Many smart people have already reacted and agreed, stating that Waiguzi cannot be killed. Qin Yu quickly signaled to Li Xianyang, who knew Li Xianyang was looking at him with a resentful expression on his face. Qin Yu's lungs ache as he gets angrier and says, You must not conspire with me, you are really a fool. If you kneel down at this moment, voluntarily admit your mistake, and request resignation, the king will naturally give you a step, and your life will be saved. Can't you even see through this? The courtiers were discussing endlessly, and the scene was very eerie. Anyone who befriends Li Xianyang is clamoring to kill Waiguzi and dismiss him. Anyone who has a grudge against Li Xianyang advocates to protect Waiguzi, protect Li Xianyang, and act according to the agreement. At this point, Ingzheng also understood what was going on. He looked at Li Xianyang with a bewildered expression on his face, feeling deeply moved in his heart. He still likes this Li Xianyang very much. This person is a brave warrior who once led 1,000 light cavalry and pursued them alone to the bank of the Shui River, cutting off the head of Prince Yan Dan. Washed the shame of Jing Ke's assassination on Qin for himself. More importantly, this person has a simple mind, a straightforward personality, and is loyal to himself and the great Qin. With his presence, he can balance the Huang family father and son among the generals, who are at the peak of their lives. Yingzheng sighed slightly, reluctant to kill Li Xian. Why not follow Qin Yu's advice and dismiss Li Xian, save his life, and find another excuse to reactivate it in the future? As for Guzi, kill it and then kill it. Anyway, his diagnosis and treatment have already ended. His life and death will not affect Fu Yao. So Yingzheng spoke up and said, Qin Yu's words are true. I have passed on my order, and Li Xian was dismissed from his position. Guzi was beheaded. Qin Yu suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, while Wang Ben and others were a bit disappointed. In the entire court, only two people were still in the dark. Li Xian and Wang Li. Li Xian muttered in a low voice, Master Fu Yao's life and death are unknown. How could he hastily kill Brother Huai? Then he reluctantly handed over his seal and ribbon. Wang Li was overjoyed and proudly said to Li Xian, Generally, even if he is a recommender, he should recommend some reliable people. For example, the last general, the recommended alchemist Lu Lai, is extremely capable. However, Uncle Li doesn't need to worry anymore. After all, if you lose your official position, you have no right to recommend. Li Xian almost spat out a mouthful of blood and said, This title has become too fast, hasn't it? Has it changed from General Li to Uncle Li? At this moment, someone outside the palace shouted, Good news, I am Guzi, who is incompatible with other alchemists. Feng Shi Lu Lai, who intended to poison Prince Fu Yao and conspired to rebel, has been taken down by me. In an instant, the silence inside the political hall was frightening. Everyone looked out in surprise, suspecting that they had heard the wrong thing. Yingzheng stood up and loudly said, Bring it in. Quickly, Li Shui and a few others escorted Lu Lai to the main hall. Before anyone else could do anything, Wang Li couldn't help but ask, Brother Lu, did you really poison Prince Fu Yao? Upon hearing these words, Wang Ben's lungs were sore with anger and he said, What a fool. Everyone is eager to get rid of Lu Lai now, but you have to ask him in front of the king. I'm afraid the king will forget. Did you recommend this person? Lu Lai collapsed to the ground, his face pale and silent. This picture clearly shows a confession. In fact, he had no intention of sophistry at all, because he knew that the king had more than 100 types of torture to tell him the truth, and it was better to honestly admit it and have a good time. Li Xian's eyebrows lit up and he said with a smile, General Wang, it seems that you are on par with me in your ability to recognize people. If you recommend such a person, are you going to apply for dismissal and hand over your seal? Perhaps I should call you Wang Xiannis. Wang Li looked at Li Xian angrily, and suddenly he loudly said, Your Majesty, Guzi cannot cure the disease of sores and gangrene. He should be beheaded. Li Xian claimed that he should also be beheaded if he advances or retreats with Guzi. Wang Ben looked helpless and said, Do you understand now? That's useless. They have already convicted him of improper recommendation and handed over the seal. Li Shui was originally eagerly waiting for the reward when he suddenly heard everyone say he was going to be executed. He was startled and shouted, Who said I didn't cure young master? Just now, young Master Fu Yao has already woken up. Otherwise, why is Lu Lai in a hurry to poison him? Yingzheng was immediately moved and asked Ji Ming, Did Fu Yao wake up? Ji Ming shook his head slowly and said, I'm not clear yet. Subsequently, he explained exactly how Li Shui deceived Lu Lai, how to find rabbits, and how to test drugs. Li Shui's lungs hurt and he stared fiercely at Ji Ming. Ji Ming sneered in his heart, If I lie for you, in case the young master dies, wouldn't I also be punished? If you want to pull me into the water, there's no door. You think I'm Lu Lai? Li Shui gritted his teeth and said, Ji Ming, the great contribution to saving the young master is not yours anymore. Ji Ming rolled his eyes and said, Great achievement. It's a big crime, isn't it? Who cares? Wang Ben smiled and said, are you awake or not? Who is lying? Why don't I go and take a look? It's easy to tell. In fact, discerning people understand that Ji Ming cannot lie, and there is no motive to lie. Waiguzi, this guy, is already a fraud, and he must be lying again. Therefore, they didn't mind going on a trip and exposing the fraud of Waiguzi, while also eliminating Li Xianyang. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Wearing clothes without recognition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Wearing clothes without recognition. Li Shui was a bit uneasy. Logically speaking, Fu Yao should also wake up. But after all, he is a child with weak resistance. If he doesn't wake up and Yingxing gets angry, my head will have to move. It's better to procrastinate for a day or two, and then you'll have more confidence. Li Shui had just thought of this when he heard Li Xianyang beside him angrily shout, how dare you do this? You don't believe Brother Huai, but I do. Brother Huai has a unique skill, and I saw it with my own eyes in Chu. Wang Li sneered. This sneer further angered Li Xianyang, who exclaimed loudly, Wang Li, I dare to use the head on my neck to bet against you. Do you dare? Wang Li was also a young man with strong blood. When Li Xianyang provoked him, his blood surged and he loudly said, why not dare? If Waiguzi really woke up Prince Fuyao, Wang Li would be willing to behead this head. But if the young master hasn't woken up, Li Laozhang, you must not live a miserable life. Li Xianyang sneered and said, all right. Let's go to the young master's bedroom now. It's easy to tell who's right and who's wrong. Li Shui too is already big, so Li Xianyang trusts himself too much, right? Surprisingly, he made a bet with his head and rushed everyone to see Fu Yao together. This is really harmful to others and oneself. Li Shui let out a dry cough and stuttered, however, if the young master really woke up just now and fell asleep again now, what should he do? The young master is tired and may not be able to wake up if he sleeps soundly. Yingxing looked at Li Shui for a while and said calmly, Doctor. After dozens of breaths, the old man who had previously treated Fu Yao arrived. He bowed and said, Medical Officer Hua Ke, I have seen the king before. Yingxing asked the old man, is there any way to distinguish between being asleep or unconscious? Hua Ke said, yes. By needling the middle acupoint of a person, if they are asleep, they will definitely be awake. If they are on the brink of death and their life is not long, then it may not be so. Wang Li said, this method is excellent. Let's go now. Anyway, the court meeting has ended, and Yingxing remembers Fu Yao. So there was no objection, so he walked towards Fu Yao's dormitory. As for Lu Lai, he has already been taken down and is probably imprisoned in a prison. After interrogation, he will be executed. On the way to Fu Yao's dormitory, many people looked at Li Shui with a gloating expression, while others looked at Li Xianyang with a sympathetic expression. Chunyu let out a sigh and thought to himself, I have a heart to save Li Xianyang's life for Li Ji's sake. I didn't expect this reckless man to be so inconspicuous and gamble with Wang Li with his head. It's just that he's seeking his own death, and I'm powerless. The ministers each had their own thoughts and walked ahead. And Ji Ming and Hua Ke gradually fell behind. Ji Ming asked in a low voice, in your opinion, can Prince Fuyao wake up? Hua Ke said, it's difficult to make the ulcer burst and the patient safe and sound. It's as difficult as the blue sky. Ji Ming suddenly had a deep understanding in his heart. He looked at Waiguzi walking ahead and sneered in his heart, can you still go to heaven? He and Waiguzi did not have a deep hatred, but in the conversation just now, the two had already stood on the opposite side. If the young master wakes up, the king will inevitably suspect that Ji Ming is lying, which is extremely dangerous. So, it's best for the young master to sleep forever. After a moment, everyone had already entered the courtyard door. Li Shui nervously glanced inside and saw Xiao Yi squatting on the ground, playing with stones with a child. Li Shui was a bit angry. Xiao Yi is really unreliable. Let him take good care of the young master, and he actually started playing here. If another Lu Lai intends to harm the young master, wouldn't that be a bad thing? Ignoring scolding Xiao Yi, Li Shui walked to the door in 3 steps and 2 steps, looking inside to see if Fu Yao had woken up. As a result, he was immediately stunned. The bed was empty, and Prince Fu Yao was missing. Li Shui was furious and turned around, grabbing Xiao Yi's clothes and shouting loudly, "Where is the young master? What should you do if you lose him? Did Wang Li steal him?" Wang Li's face turned pale as he stood on the side. How could anyone openly accuse someone like this in the world? Xiao Yi was so scared that he couldn't help but stammer, "Young master, young master." At this moment, the child next to him suddenly knelt down to Yingzheng and said, "I have seen my father before." Yingzheng, with a surprised expression on his face, lifted the child up and asked, "Fu Yao, have you recovered from the sore on your back?" The child said, "It's still a little painful, but it's okay now. I just drank some congee, and I also have strength." Li Shui was a bit confused. He let go of Xiao Yi and smiled awkwardly, saying, "So the young master is here." When he put on his clothes, he didn't recognize him. Previously, Fu Yao had been lying on the bed, naked, and now suddenly dressed neatly, squatting on the ground. No wonder Li Shui didn't recognize him. At this moment, everyone stared blankly at Li Shui. Some people admire, some are in awe, and some are simply afraid. Is the terminal illness really cured? And it's only a few hours, young master can walk freely, just like an ordinary person. Li Xianyang suddenly burst out laughing and said, "Wang Li, why not hand over the head of the person on the neck?" Wang Li looked at Wang Ben somewhat bewildered. Wang Ben now wants to crash and die on the stone steps. How could he embarrass himself, this foolish son, 5 times and 3 times? At this point, one cannot watch their son be killed. He could only shamelessly say to Li Xianyang, "Generally, you ignorant dog, please don't remember the villains." Li Xianyang nodded and said, "I see. It turns out that Wang Lixian's nephew is going to break his promise and live a miserable life. Qin people value faith and righteousness, and Li Xianyang's words are basically cursing Wang for being inferior to pigs and dogs." Wang Li's blood surged and he gritted his teeth, saying, "If you want this head, I'll give it to you." Wang Ben looked around. The courtiers who befriended Wang Ben pleaded with Li Xianyang one after another. Not only did they plead with Li Xianyang, but many people also asked Yingzheng to save Wang Li. Yingzheng had the intention to suppress the father and son of the Wang family, but he didn't want to kill anyone yet. After all, Wang Li was also considered a fierce general. Because one bet ended up dead, the losses were too great. So he said indifferently, "Wang Li is young, why should Li Xianyang have the same view as him? Let him apologize and compensate 10,000 yuan as a way to apologize, that's all." Li Xianyang did not express any opposition. He was well aware that his foundation in the court was actually far inferior to that of the Wang father and son. After all, there is also Wang Jian, who has made outstanding contributions in the Wang family. Although Wang Jian has returned home for retirement and no longer cares about politics, his influence is still there, and Yingzheng's respect for him is still there. It is impossible to take Wang Li's life because of a gambling agreement. Wang Jian couldn't have watched his grandson die. So Li Xianyang nodded. Wang Li wanted to speak hard, but was kicked hard in the calf by Wang Ben and then knelt down. Kneeling down, Wang Li had no choice but to lower his head and say in a muffled voice, "General Li, I am young and ignorant, and my mouth is open. I hope General Li won't mind." Li Xianyang laughed heartily and patted Li Shui's shoulder, saying, "Brother Huai, since I was defeated in the battle against Chu, Wang Li, this beast, has been mocking and mocking me all day. It's not until today that he's really angry." Wang Li's face turned red with anger when he heard Li Xianyang insulting him. I just can't get it right now, I can only swallow my anger. Li Xian lowered his head and glanced at Wang Li, saying calmly, after returning, please deliver the 10,000 gold to my general's residence as soon as possible. If you dare to lose weight, I will not spare you lightly. Wang Li almost vomited blood and said, lack of weight and weight. Who do you think Wang Li is? End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Raising Eyes and Exhaling. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Raising eyes and exhaling. Yingzheng looked carefully at Li Shui and said, Waiguzi has cured Fu Yao. I want to reward him heavily. Li Shui was suddenly full of energy, waiting for Yingzheng's reward. However, Yingzheng changed the topic and asked, Waiguzi, what do you want? Li Shui's heart suddenly heated up and he thought to himself, whatever I want, you can give it to me. However, before Li Shui could open his mouth, Yingzheng said, well, I'll give you a few hours to think carefully. After sunset, I'll ask you again. Li Shui was momentarily stunned, but quickly realized. Yingzheng has something to say to himself, but he doesn't want the ministers around him to hear it. So he nodded and said, thank you very much, King. Yingzheng glanced at Li Xian again and said, Li Xian's commendation was meritorious. He was promoted to a higher rank and granted 1,000 acres of land. Li Xian happily thanked him. After casually rewarding Li Xian, Yingzheng pulled Fu Yao and turned around to leave. Li Shui quickly said to Yingzheng, the young master has sores and gangrene on his body, which is no longer a serious problem. However, it is still necessary to pay attention to cleanliness, and the wound should not be contaminated with dirt. It is best for me to change the dressing once a day. Yingzheng lowered his head and saw that there seemed to be layers of bandages wrapped around Fu Yao's clothes. Yingzheng thought for a moment and said, I will take Fu Yao to meet you Meiren. After a while, I will bring him back to you. How about you taking care of him these days? Li Shui breathed a sigh of relief and said, that would be great. Yingzheng said again, Ji Ming, stay here and listen to Waiguzi's orders to assist in taking care of Fu Yao. Ji Ming looked reluctant, but he didn't have the courage to refuse. Who knew that Li Shui shook his head and said, no way. Ji Ming is such a deceitful person, full of nonsense. He is known for stirring up trouble and framing loyalty and righteousness. He is also a sincere person. I don't know if he took the money from Fang Shi Lu Lai or if he took advantage of the power of General Wang Li, who has been opposing me and obstructing my treatment of Prince Fu Yao. I am worried that if he stays, he will poison the young master and frame me for it. Wang Li was startled and blurted out, what's with me? Why did you bring me along? But Ji Ming's face turned pale as he pointed at Li Shui, trembling uncontrollably. You're speechless, he said. Yingzheng gave Ji Ming a faint glance and said, Ji Ming doesn't need to stay. Follow me back. There are some things that I need to ask clearly. Xiao Yi and Wu Jiao, let's stay here. After saying these words, Yingzheng pulled Fu Yao away. Ji Ming looked miserable and stumbled away step by step. Although Wang Li was angry, he dared not do anything to Waiguzi. Seeing Yingzheng leave, he snorted coldly, stomped his feet, and also left. The courtiers who befriended Wang Ben all looked embarrassed and uninteresting, and left one after another. Li Xian chuckled and walked up to Chun Yu, saying, Sister, you are usually dissatisfied with me, Li Xian. What about today? Chun Yu sneered coldly and said, this Waiguzi is just lucky. Judging from his aggressive appearance, does he seem like a virtuous expert? Li Xian wanted to argue, but Chun Yu didn't give him this opportunity, so he turned around and left. Li Xian raised his eyebrows and was very excited today. He pulled Li Shui and said, Brother Huai, we must have a drink today. However, one drink is good. After drinking it, I need to go home quickly. Madam is afraid she is in a hurry. Haha. Later, Li Xian sniffed and said, is there good wine here? Before Li Shui could stop him, he picked up the jar of alcohol and took a sip of it for himself. After drinking, Li Xianyang gave a thumbs up and said, "What a strong drink." Then, his body shook and he fell drunk to the ground. Li Shui was a little helpless. This alcohol is distilled from strong liquor. It is different from the medical alcohol with additives in later generations, but it is more similar to high-concentration baijiu. Li Xianyang, an ancient man who never drank baijiu, had a straight breath of boredom. If he was not drunk, he would have a ghost. Li Xianyang fell drunk, and Li Shui was helpless. He was just a small alchemist and had no right to keep Li Xianyang in the palace. He had to ask Xiao Yi and Wu Jiao to find a car to take Li Xianyang home. Mrs. Li sat at her own house with a pale complexion. "Last night, I stayed at the Qin family for a whole night. After returning home in the morning, I sent someone to inquire about the palace news. Until sunset on the western hills. One day and one night, she didn't eat anything and didn't rest for a quarter of an hour." Li Jia travels back and forth between the palace and Li Xianyang's mansion. Bad news keeps coming back one after another. "Madam, there is news from the palace that Qin has indeed taken action, using retreat as a means of advancement to protect the general's life. However, there is intense debate in the court, and the king has not yet agreed. Madam, things are not going well. There is news coming from the palace again. Wang Ben has seen through Qin plan and must wait for Prince Fuyao to wake up. If he cannot wake up, the general will accompany Waiguzi to inquire about the execution. Madam, there's a big deal going on. General and Wang Li are risking their lives. We've already gone to see the young master's condition. If the young master wakes up, Wang Li will commit suicide. If the young master doesn't wake up, General will commit suicide." This series of news has shaken Lady Li, who is about to faint at any moment. Madame Li remained silent for a moment and said to the panting Li Jia, "Detect again, wait at the palace gate, and make sure to find out the exact information. When you find out the general, whether he is alive or dead." Li Jia agreed, wiped the sweat off his forehead, and hurriedly left. Li Jia has been away for a long time without coming back, but Xianyang has arrived. The relationship between Xinji and Mrs. Li cannot be considered harmonious. Everyone is the wives of meritorious nobles, and they inevitably compete with each other on a daily basis, either in terms of appearance or family background. Mrs. Li guessed that Xianyang was here to watch the excitement, and her mood immediately became extremely irritable. Who knew that Xinji was not just here to watch the excitement? After she arrived, she said with a sympathetic expression, "I have heard about the gambling agreement between your families Li Xianyang and Wang Li. Just now, I saw General Wang Li leave the palace. Your elder sister, Chun Yu, also came out of the palace with a gloomy expression on her face. Based on this, it can be inferred that Li Xianyang may have had more misfortune than good." These words made Mrs. Li's face turn pale. Xinji secretly felt a little proud and thought to herself, "You were born better than me, and my husband is in a high position of power. He always puts pressure on me, so what happened today?" Xianyang pretended to comfort Mrs. Li beside her. While comforting, I admired Mrs. Li's sadness and helplessness. After a full hour, Xinji finally had enough of her addiction and stood up satisfied, intending to bid farewell and go back. At this moment, outside the gate, two young eunuchs came in sharp voices. "Li family, come quickly. Carrying your general is exhausting me." Madame Li shook her body and almost fainted. "Eunuch! Carry it." Two Li family members hurriedly ran out, and after a moment, they really carried Li Xianyang in. Mrs. Li collapsed to the ground and began to cry softly. Xianyang patted her shoulder beside her and whispered, "Life and death have their own destiny, and we will change our sorrows." Wu Jiao was a bit puzzled and said, "But I just got drunk. Why do I have to go through mourning and change?" Madame Li was taken aback and raised her head to ask, are you drunk? Xianyang blurted out, didn't you lose the bet and want to commit suicide? Before Wu Jiao could speak, a sullen voice came from outside. We were sent by General Wang Li. We have presented 10,000 pieces of gold for inspection by the Li family. General Wang Li's message was, thank you, General Li Xian, for disregarding past grievances. Wang Li is immensely grateful, just a few thousand pieces of gold, as a gesture of apology. Xinji stood there, feeling a bit confused. Wang Li, come to apologize. At this moment, a team of servants had already carried boxes one by one and entered the courtyard of the Li family. The servant of the Wang family clearly felt embarrassed, bowed and said, the gold has already been delivered. I'll say goodbye soon. Who knew that Li Xian came drunk and said, check. Check it out, don't lose any weight. The servants of the Wang family immediately blushed. However, he could only endure humiliation, endure his temper, weigh each box one by one, then bravely salute and walk away quickly. Mrs. Li helped Li Xian and asked, did you win the bet? Are you awake, young master? The answer to her was a snore. Wu Jiao stood beside him with a beaming expression and said, that's natural. General Li risked everything to support his life and death relationship today. Waiguzi lived up to everyone's expectations and turned the tide. It's really exciting. This matter has already been widely spread in the palace. Everyone admires General Li very much. Wang Li lost his head, but he dared not commit suicide and lived a miserable life. He knelt down in front of General Li and apologized. By the way, the king also elevated General Li's rank and granted him 1,000 acres of fertile land. It is estimated that there will be an order tomorrow. Mrs. Li's eyes lit up immediately, and the haze of several days swept away. She grabbed Li Xian's ear, twisted it, and said, you're also lucky. If you dare to do this again next time, I won't let it go lightly. And Xianyang next to her suddenly felt uncomfortable all over. Mrs. Li, it's clear that she's showing off her love and showing off her husband to this audience. At this moment, Li Jia sweated profusely and walked in panting heavily, shouting at the top of his lungs, great joy, madam. The general has won the bet and is proud to be promoted to higher positions. Mrs. Li was both curious and amused, I already knew this news. I ordered you to wait at the palace gate. Why did you only come back now? Li Jia fell to the ground, almost gasping for breath. I got the news and rushed back. But on this day, the old servant has already run more than 50 times, and really, I can't walk anymore. The signing matter has been basically settled, please rest assured to invest. Thank you for your support, end of this chapter. Chapter 10. Asking ghosts and gods without asking the common people. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Asking ghosts and gods without asking the common people. Li Xian fell drunk at home, and Mrs. Li personally cooked a bowl of sobering soup for him. As for Li Shui in the palace, he is much more pitiful. I searched for some food in the fire room, quickly filled my stomach, then took a shower and changed clothes, waiting for Yingzheng to summon me. Sure enough, after nightfall, a small eunuch came to look for Li Shui and said that the king had invited him. Li Shui followed the eunuch all the way towards Yingzheng's sleeping palace. While on the road, he pondered and asked casually, why don't you see Zhao Gao? The young eunuch was startled and said, what Lord Huai said, but the commander of the Zhongche prefecture, Lord Zhao. Li Shui said, well, anyway, his name is Zhao Gao and he has a good relationship with the king. It seems like he's the teacher of Prince Hu Hai. Like you, he's both eunuchs, why don't he serve in the palace? The young eunuch was almost scared to pee. He had long heard that Waiguzi was very brave, but he didn't expect it to be so big. The eunuch let out a dry laugh and gritted his head, saying, Lord Zhao, you are the commander of the Zhongche mansion. What are you, a servant? How dare you compare yourself to Lord Zhao? Li Shui exclaimed, "So, is he a true official?" The eunuch kindly reminded, "Lord Zhao is not only an official, but also holds a high position of power. He is in charge of the Grand Prince's chariot and seal, and has won the trust of the Grand Prince. Lord Huai must not underestimate him, be careful of any trouble." Li Shui nodded without further questioning. "It's not long, Ying Zheng's dormitory has arrived." Outside the dormitory, Ji Ming was pinned to the ground, and next to him was a strong man holding a whip, whipping him. Ji Ming was disheveled, crying mournfully and desperately, begging for mercy. Li Shui sighed and said with emotion, "Ji Ming, the great credit for saving the young master has come to your lips. You don't want it. Unfortunately, you have to be whipped here. I don't know what you think." Ji Ming gave Li Shui a resentful glance, but was whipped and lowered his head. The eunuch asked Li Shui to wait outside and then went in to report. After a moment, the eunuch poked his head out and said, "Your Majesty, please." Li Shui followed the eunuch inside and saw that the palace was very large, with over a dozen bronze palace lamps inside. The palace lamp is not very bright, but it illuminates this sleeping palace in a hazy and ethereal atmosphere. In the depths of the palace, Ying Zheng was kneeling on a beautiful mat reading a book, with two palace maids standing beside him. Ying Zheng saw Li Shui coming and immediately pointed to another mat beside him, saying, "Sit down." Li Shui bowed and sat down. Ying Zheng put down the bamboo slip and asked directly, "Yesterday you said that you had met a fairy in your dream. At that time, I was skeptical and did not ask in detail. But today, you have cured Fu Yao's sore and gangrene disease, and indeed have a unique skill. Why don't you tell me what the fairy looks like? Where is the fairy world?" Li Shui suddenly realized that no wonder he had to come over in the middle of the night. It turned out that it was not for reward, but to listen to the secrets of the immortal world. Li Shui is a bit worried. How can I say that I dreamt of a fairy who farted? He let out a dry cough and gritted his scalp, saying, "In my dream, I was in a fairyland. I really don't know the location of the fairyland. As for the appearance of the immortal, I found. I also discovered that the immortal was once a mortal with 7 emotions and 6 desires. In fact, even the immortal was divided into states and established a country, and there were also conflicts." Ying Zheng did not refute this point and nodded, saying, "Donggang's anger cannot collide with Zhou Shan, and even immortals have conflicts. I know this." After Li Shui rambled on for a while, a sudden inspiration came to his mind. In the eyes of the Qin people, the technology of later generations is considered a fairyland, isn't it? So he was full of energy and said, "King, in the immortal world, there is a divine farmer named Yuan. Yuan Shenong has a rice seed that produces 1,000 kilograms per mu." Ying Zheng was shocked and said, "Produce 1,000 caddies per mu. Isn't that there will never be a famine?" Li Shui said, "That's nature. People in the immortal realm are well fed and clothed, not afraid of hunger, but afraid of being too fat." Ying Zheng asked Li Shui again, "Did you bring back the rice seeds?" Li Shui chuckled and said, "I just met a fairy in my dream. How can I bring back the things from my dream?" Ying Zheng could only nod regretfully. Li Shui said again, "In the immortal realm, there is a divine chariot. This chariot is made of steel tendons and iron bones, with 4 wheels that can rotate on its own without the need for cattle or horses to pull it. It travels thousands of miles a day at lightning speed." Ying Zheng listened eagerly and said, "If I had this carriage, the 6 kingdoms would have been destroyed long ago." Li Shui said, "If we talk about war, there is a firearm in the fairyland that is as big as a fist. When thrown, it can explode and kill dozens of people with a loud bang." Upon hearing this, Ying Zheng let out a sigh and said, "This firearm sounds a bit like an elixir. Didn't you also make a loud explosion while refining the elixir the day before yesterday? Why did this elixir turn into a weapon again?" Li Shui was taken aback for a moment, wishing he could slap himself a few times. He was really talkative. Isn't that just revealing the truth? He let out a dry cough and said, immortal qi can be used to refine pills and also as weapons. It's like water in the mortal world. Water can be consumed, bathed, irrigated, and even cause catastrophic floods. It all depends on how it is used. Yingzheng nodded, clearly agreeing with this statement. Li Shui breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that after curing Fu Yao, he was already considered a trustworthy person in Yingzheng's heart. Otherwise, this nonsense is impossible to pass. Next, Yingzheng did not ask about the fairy world's observations. The more I asked, the more I became envious, but unfortunately, those mysterious things were all dreamt of by Li Shui and couldn't be brought out at all. It's just a torture. Yingzheng asked, have you ever seen a fairy pill in the immortal realm? Li Shuineo supplemented the production process of the pharmaceutical factory and said, not bad. In my dream, I have seen a fairy refining pills. Fairies also need to swallow pills. There are different types of pills, some can make people hear and see clearly, some can make people strong, and some can make people live longer. Not only do they have different types, but they also have different shapes. Some are in the form of pills, some are in powder, and some are as clear as water. I have learned the method of refining from immortals. However, refining the elixir of immortality is quite cumbersome and difficult. I will need some more time, and as for the rest of the elixirs, simpler ones are enough. For example, if you want to cure Prince Fu Yao, you can easily refine it. It's called alcohol, which means essence in wine. Yingzheng is stunned. The essence in the wine. Why did Ji Ming tell me that it was the spirit in the wine that day? Li Shui suddenly showed a look of grievance and said, I have been refining elixirs for the king, which has caused a lot of jealousy from people. They deliberately distort their names, fabricate some absurd and ridiculous jokes, and sow discord between me and the king. I really don't know what their intentions are. At this moment, the strong man outside the door came in panting and bowed, saying, Your Majesty, Ji Ming's whipping has been done. Yingzheng's face turned pale as he said, Fight again. End of this chapter.